Amanda had always been a dedicated doctor, someone her colleagues admired and her patients trusted. But nothing could prepare her for the day that would change her life forever. That night, the shift at the hospital was particularly chaotic. Amid emergencies and urgent phone calls, she received a patient who appeared to be near death. Amanda did everything she could, every procedure, every intervention, but nothing was enough. He passed away, and guilt began to eat away at her soul. The following days were a blur. Amanda was called into the hospital director's office, where she heard words she never expected to hear. "We regret to inform you that you are being fired." The decision hit her like a brutal blow, and she didn't have the strength to argue. It felt as if an abyss opened up beneath her feet. Back in her small apartment, loneliness began to wrap around Amanda like a heavy, suffocating blanket. The phone rang incessantly, worried friends, family trying to understand what had happened, but she ignored every call, unable to face anyone. How could she? She had failed, and the feeling of failure consumed her. The nights were the worst. When the world quieted down and the city lights flickered outside her window, Amanda tried to sleep, but her mind wouldn't allow it. The image of the dead patient in the hospital was burned into her eyelids. When she finally did fall asleep, nightmares took over, becoming increasingly vivid and disturbing. In the dream, she was back in the emergency room, reliving every moment of that fateful night. But this time, the patient directly blamed her. His words were blades piercing her soul, and she would wake up sweating, her heart racing uncontrollably. Gradually, Amanda began to avoid leaving her home. The walls of her apartment, once a cozy refuge, now felt like a prison. She spent her days in silence, pacing back and forth, aimlessly and without purpose. The voices of those trying to help her faded away, until silence was all that remained. Isolated from the world and from herself, Amanda fell into a void that seemed endless. Guilt and regret became her only companions, and each day felt like an echo of the last. The life she once knew was slowly crumbling, and she saw no way out of the darkness that consumed her. After weeks of isolation, Amanda finally forced herself to leave her apartment. Her gloomy days needed a break, so she decided to grab a coffee at a quiet place away from prying eyes. Sitting in a corner, she absently stirred her cup, the aroma of coffee mixing with the bitter memories that still haunted her. She didn't want to be there, but she needed air. She needed something to remind her that the world still turned outside. It was then that she heard a familiar voice. "Amanda?" She looked up to see Marcos, a nurse she had worked with for years. He was visibly surprised to see her, but the warmth in his smile was genuine. He approached and, without hesitation, sat down across from her. "It's been a while since I've seen you. How have you been?" he asked, trying to hide the concern in his tone. Amanda shrugged, attempting to smile, but feeling disoriented by the simple social interaction. They started chatting, with Marcos carefully avoiding the topic everyone seemed to shy away from, the night that changed her life. But Marcos, being himself, couldn't hold back for long. He lowered his voice and glanced around as if he were about to reveal a secret. "Have you heard what happened after you left?" Amanda's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't prepared to revisit that, but at the same time, curiosity consumed her. "What do you mean?" she asked, trying to keep her composure. Marcos hesitated, clearly unsure if he should continue. I heard some strange rumors. They said that the records for that patient were altered." He lowered his voice even more. "They say there's something wrong with the documents, something that doesn't match what was reported that night." Amanda felt her blood run cold. What did he mean something was wrong? Her mind started to whirl as she tried to remember every detail of that fateful night. She had replayed the events countless times in her head, but the idea that something could have been manipulated, it was inconceivable. "Altered how?" she finally managed to ask, her voice coming out weaker than she intended. "I'm not sure," Marcos replied, his face reflecting the same confusion Amanda felt. "All I know is that some colleagues are saying the records don't match what really happened in that room, and that it wasn't just you who made mistakes. Are you enjoying the story so far?" Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss any stories like this one. These words hit Amanda like a punch in the stomach. She leaned back in her chair trying to process what she had just heard. If the records had really been altered, what did that mean? Was someone trying to hide something? And why? Marcos, noticing the whirlwind of thoughts occupying Amanda's mind, gently placed his hand over hers. Amanda, I know you feel guilty, but maybe you're not the only one responsible for what happened. These words echoed in Amanda's mind as she said goodbye to Marcos and headed home. For the first time in weeks, she felt something different from guilt and pain. She felt a spark of doubt, a small glimmer that could change everything. And that spark consumed her as she walked through the city streets, questioning everything she thought she knew about that tragic night. Marcos's words kept replaying in Amanda's head. In the silence of her mind, they echoed like a persistent refrain, eroding the certainties she had built around her guilt. There was something that didn't add up, something that needed to be uncovered. And Amanda knew that to find the answers, she would have to face the ghosts she had been avoiding. The next morning, Amanda found herself standing in front of the hospital doors. The familiar building that had once been her second home now felt cold and intimidating. Taking a deep breath, she stepped inside, the sterile smell and muffled sounds bringing back memories of days gone by. But she wasn't there for nostalgia. She was there for answers. It started in the records room, a place that didn't attract much attention, except from those who knew exactly what to look for. Amanda greeted the receptionist, an older woman who barely looked up to acknowledge her. With a bit of small talk and a rehearsed smile, she managed to get permission to review some old files, claiming she needed to finish up some incomplete reports before her departure. As she flipped through the papers, Amanda felt the tension rise. The reports from that fateful night were there, cold and impersonal as always, but something was off. She knew those records by heart, every procedure, every note she had made that night. However, as she reread the notes, she noticed small discrepancies, dates that didn't make sense, medication dosages that didn't match what she remembered administering. Small, yes, but troubling. With her heart racing, Amanda decided to dig deeper. She needed to talk to people who were there that night. She knew she risked attracting unwanted attention, but the need for truth was stronger than her fear. First, she went to the emergency room where she found Carlos, a technician who worked the night shift. He had always been discreet, a silent observer, and Amanda knew he noticed details that others overlooked. "Carlos," she began, trying to sound casual. "Do you remember that night when the patient died? Something seemed off, didn't it?" Carlos looked at her for a moment and Amanda saw hesitation in his eyes. Finally, he spoke in a low tone. "Amanda, there was something unusual. After you left, I saw some people from the administration going into the room where he died. They said it was to review the records, but they don't usually do that, not like that." Amanda felt a shiver run down her spine. "What do you think happened?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know," he replied, looking uncomfortable. "But I think someone was covering something up, and this isn't the first time I've heard about it." Leaving the hospital, Amanda felt the weight of the revelations piling up on her. There was something deeper going on, something that went beyond a simple medical error. She could no longer ignore the feeling that she was just beginning to scratch the surface of a dangerous secret. When she returned home, Amanda sat on the living room floor, surrounded by the documents she had gathered. The feeling of being on unfamiliar ground was overwhelming, but one thing was clear in her mind. The patient's death was not just a case of negligence. What she had discovered so far was only the beginning. Sleepless nights were becoming common for Amanda. What started as a quest for answers was slowly turning into an obsession. Each new discovery brought her closer to the truth, but it also made her more anxious, as if she were entering forbidden territory where even her own shadow could be a threat. It was one of those nights, while she was sitting in a quiet cafe, flipping through the notes she had managed to gather, that something strange happened. The place was almost empty, except for a few scattered customers and a distracted waitress. Amanda was so immersed in her papers that she almost didn't notice when a man walked in and approached her table. He was tall, wearing a dark coat that seemed too heavy for the season, and a hat that obscured part of his face. There was something about him that exuded a palpable tension, a presence that made the air around Amanda feel denser. When he stopped beside her, Amanda felt a shiver of alertness. Without saying a word, he pulled out a chair and sat down, looking at her intensely. Amanda was about to ask who he was when he raised a hand, as if asking for silence. With his other hand, he placed a brown envelope on the table, slowly pushing it in her direction. "You're looking for answers," he said, his voice low and hoarse, as if each word were a secret. "This envelope has some of them, but you need to be careful, very careful." She stared at the envelope, her heart pounding like a drum. "Who are you?" Amanda finally managed to ask, her voice filled with suspicion and curiosity. The man smiled in a way that offered no comfort. "That doesn't matter. What matters is what's inside that envelope. There are things happening at the hospital, things you shouldn't know, but you're already too involved to back out now." Amanda's mind was racing with questions, but before she could formulate one, the man stood up. "If I were you," he said, his tone sounding more like a warning than advice, "I wouldn't open this here. Wait until you're in a safe place." And with that, he was gone, disappearing into the darkness of the night just as mysteriously as he had appeared. Amanda sat there, frozen, staring at the envelope as if it were a bomb about to explode. Every fiber of her being was on high alert. She looked around, but no one seemed to have noticed the strange encounter. With trembling hands, she tucked the envelope into her bag and with a forced calmness paid for her coffee and left the establishment. She hurried through the streets, feeling as if every step was being followed by invisible eyes. When she finally arrived home, she locked the door and turned off the lights, leaving only a dim lamp on the table. She sat down, pulled out the envelope, and after taking a deep breath, opened it. What she found inside was much more than she had expected. Documents, printed emails, lists of names. Everything pointed to an illegal scheme within the hospital, involving doctors she would have never suspected. It was about organ trafficking, with people dying in convenient ways so their organs could be sold on the black market. And the patient Amanda had lost? He was at the center of it all. Amanda felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. She was involved in something much larger and more dangerous than she could have imagined. And now, with this information in her hands, she knew there was no turning back. The only question left was, what to do next? What Amanda discovered in the envelope was terrifying, but even worse was the feeling of being watched. In the days following that mysterious encounter, she noticed that the tension around her was increasing. Paranoia began to seep into her thoughts. The sound of footsteps behind her seemed louder, and the gazes of people on the street felt longer, more scrutinizing. Something was definitely wrong. And then, the calls began. They always happened in the middle of the night when the silence of her home made the phones ring even more frightening. At first, no one spoke on the other end, just the sound of heavy breathing, as if someone were measuring her fear. Amanda tried to hang up quickly, but her heart raced every time. Soon the calls escalated to direct threats. Distorted voices, almost unrecognizable, whispered dark warnings. "Stop digging where you shouldn't, doctor. This could end very badly for you." But Amanda, stubborn and determined, couldn't. She didn't want to. Stop. The search for the truth had become a matter of life or death, not just for those involved, but for her as well. She was aware of the risks, but the thought of backing down disgusted her. One night, after returning to her apartment following another day of investigation, she noticed that something was out of place. The door was ajar, which was strange since Amanda always took care to lock everything. She paused at the entrance, her heart pounding in her chest, a sense of impending danger growing within her. Cautiously pushing the door open, Amanda stepped inside. The sight that awaited her was terrifying. Her apartment had been completely ransacked. Papers were scattered on the floor, drawers were pulled out and tossed aside, and her personal belongings were in disarray. It was a systematic mess, as if someone had been searching for something specific. something she shouldn't have had, but the worst was yet to come. Amid the chaos, on the living room mirror, someone had written in red ink, "You have been warned." Amanda took a step back, fear finally enveloping her like a cold cloak. This wasn't just a break-in, it was a message. A message that she was being watched, that her movements were being monitored, and that if she continued, there would be consequences. She felt a wave of nausea rise, but at the same time, a fierce anger began to bubble within her. They were trying to silence her. They were trying to scare her into giving up. But Amanda knew that backing down now meant accepting defeat, meant abandoning all those who had suffered at the hands of the real culprits. She walked through the apartment, her legs trembling, trying to organize her thoughts. Every disheveled part of the apartment was a reminder that she was alone in this fight, but also a reminder that her quest for the truth was making her tormentors nervous. Before leaving, Amanda paused in front of the mirror, staring at the threat written in red. The ink was still fresh, slowly dripping down the glass as if it were bleeding. She grabbed a cloth and wiped away the phrase, then, with cold determination in her eyes, spoke aloud to herself, as if responding directly to those watching her. "You won't stop me." From that moment on, Amanda knew things were about to escalate. She was dealing with people who would do anything to keep their secrets buried. But the fear she felt was no longer a weakness. It was the fuel that would drive her to the end of this journey. Amanda was on the brink of despair. The threats, the invasion of her apartment, the constant feeling of being watched, everything was beginning to take a psychological toll. But giving up was not an option. She needed help, someone she could trust, someone as committed as she was to uncovering the truth. The challenge was finding that person in a world where loyalties were bought and secrets were dangerous. It was on a gray afternoon while reviewing documents in a quiet cafe that she met Gabriel. He seemed out of place there, leafing through papers with the same intensity she had, but with a deep sadness in his eyes. Amanda watched him for a while, noticing that he kept checking the same name on a list, the name of a doctor she knew very well. It was a name that appeared in several of the compromising documents she had found. Without hesitation, Amanda decided to take a risk. She stood up and cautiously approached his table. "Excuse me?" she began, trying not to seem intrusive. "Are you researching Dr. Almeida?" Gabriel looked up, surprised but not defensive. "Yes, I am." His voice was steady, but there was a vulnerability there, a pain barely hidden. "Why? Do you know him?" Amanda sat down across from him, feeling that this was a crucial moment. I'm investigating some suspicious practices at the hospital, and his name has come up more than once. What are you looking for?" Gabriel looked at her for a long moment, assessing her, trying to decide if he could trust her. Then, with a sigh, he began to speak. "My brother died in the hospital a few months ago. The cause of death was attributed to unexpected complications, but I never believed that. He was fine, healthy, until suddenly everything fell apart. After his death, I received an anonymous letter urging me to investigate Dr. Almeida and his team, saying that something was very wrong. Since then, I've been trying to find out what really happened." Amanda felt a chill run down her spine. Gabriel's story was painfully familiar. She reached out and, with a mix of empathy and urgency, said, "I believe you. I'm going through something similar. There's something big happening at the hospital, and I think it involves the deaths of several patients, including your brother and my patient. They're trying to silence me. I need help, but I don't know who to trust." Gabriel's eyes softened as he saw the honesty and desperation in Amanda's expression. He realized he wasn't alone in this fight, and neither was she. "I'm a lawyer," he said, finally revealing his purpose. "And I can help you build a case against them. But we're going to need concrete evidence, something they can't contest or hide. I'm willing to risk everything to find the truth. And if you're with me, we don't have to do this alone." Amanda felt a wave of relief wash over her, as if a huge weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Finally, she had an ally, someone who understood what was at stake and had the skills necessary to confront the monsters hiding behind the hospital walls. From that moment on, Amanda and Gabriel began to work together, combining their skills and knowledge. They knew they were on dangerous ground, but with each new piece of evidence they uncovered, their determination only grew stronger. The threats didn't stop and the pressure only increased, but now, with Gabriel by her side, Amanda felt that for the first time in a long while, there was a real chance to expose the truth and take down those who thought they were above suspicion. The pursuit of justice had found its purpose, and together, Amanda and Gabriel were ready to face any obstacles in their way. Their nights of tireless work began to pay off. Amanda and Gabriel spent weeks sifting through documents, discreetly interviewing hospital staff and connecting the dots of a sinister network hidden in plain sight. Each new detail that emerged was more disturbing than the last, and the overall picture that started to form was nothing short of terrifying. On a rainy night, as the storm intensified outside, Amanda and Gabriel were gathered in her small apartment, which now served as their makeshift headquarters. The space was covered with papers, folders, and hastily scrawled notes, all piecing together a grim puzzle they were assembling with extreme caution. Gabriel, with trembling hands from exhaustion and adrenaline, opened a file he had obtained from an anonymous contact at the hospital. "I think this is the last piece we needed," he said, handing the document to Amanda. She took the file and began to read, each line making her stomach churn. The document was clear and straightforward. The hospital was involved in an organ trafficking scheme where selected patients, usually those who appeared vulnerable and lacked close relatives, were deliberately murdered so their organs could be harvested and sold on the black market. Amanda felt a wave of nausea as she read the name of her patient, the man whose death had haunted her for so many nights. There he was, listed as a viable candidate, a carefully chosen victim. The notes described medical procedures that had been intentionally manipulated to ensure he wouldn't survive. It was a cold, calculated murder, and worse yet, it was sanctioned by the highest levels of the hospital administration. She dropped the paper, her hands trembling, and looked at Gabriel, who was watching her with a mix of sadness and determination. "They killed him," she whispered, as if she were still trying to process the reality. "They killed all of them." Gabriel nodded, his expression serious. "Yes, and this isn't an isolated case. There are dozens of victims, all chosen for the same reason. They were easy to silence, easy to eliminate without raising suspicion. And the ones responsible are the same people who are supposed to ensure patient safety. They've turned the hospital into a facade for their illegal operations." Amanda felt anger burning inside her, mixed with a sharp pain for the loss of her patient. A pain she now knew was justified. "We have enough to take them down," she said, a new determination shining in her eyes. "This ends here." Both of them knew they were at a point of no return. With this evidence in hand, they could expose the scandal and ensure that those responsible were brought to justice. But it also meant they were taking a greater risk than ever. The people behind this scheme were powerful and wouldn't hesitate to eliminate any threats. That night, with the sound of rain pounding against the windows, Amanda and Gabriel began to compile the evidence, organizing everything meticulously. Every document, every testimony, every record that exposed the horror hidden within the hospital would be delivered to the authorities, the press, anyone who could help take down those monsters. They knew it wouldn't be easy, that the repercussions would be intense, but they also knew they had no choice. Amanda looked out the window, the storm outside reflecting the turmoil inside her. But this time she felt no fear, only the certainty that they were doing the right thing. "Let's do this," she said, looking at Gabriel. "Let's expose everything." And so, in that small apartment that now felt like a refuge, Amanda and Gabriel prepared for the final battle. The revelation they were about to make would shake the hospital to its foundations, and the shockwaves would reverberate far beyond its walls. The moment had come. Amanda knew she could wait no longer. With all the evidence gathered and Gabriel by her side, they were ready to make their final move. But Amanda also knew that the people behind this scheme were dangerous, capable of anything to protect their secrets. It was a choice between justice or eternal silence, and she understood that her own life was at stake. The plan was simple but risky. Amanda and Gabriel decided that the only way to ensure the authorities would act was to confront the responsible parties directly, forcing them to confess. Gabriel had prepared a discreet recording device, which Amanda carefully hid in her clothing. If everything went right, they would have the confession needed to take down the entire criminal network. If something went wrong, she preferred not to think about it. Amanda entered the hospital one last time, feeling a chill run down her spine that she couldn't ignore. Every step seemed to echo through the hallways, and she could feel invisible eyes watching her, the same ones that had tried to silence her before. But now she was ready, determined. Gabriel waited for her outside, ready to act if things went out of control. But this was a confrontation Amanda needed to face alone. She walked down the main hallway to Dr. Almeida's office, the man at the center of the entire conspiracy. He was respected, untouchable, and for that reason, the most dangerous person in the hospital. When Amanda opened the door, he was sitting at his desk, his expression calm as if he had been expecting her. "Ah, Dr. Amanda," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I was wondering when you would show up." Amanda felt a wave of nausea but didn't let it show. "I know everything," she replied, keeping her voice steady. "I know about the organ trafficking. I know that you killed my patient. And I have evidence." Almeida's smile faded, replaced by a cold, calculating look. "You're playing with fire, doctor. You have no idea what you're doing." "I know exactly what I'm doing," Amanda shot back, taking a step forward. "And you do too. This hospital should be a place of healing, but you've turned it into a black market, selling lives for profit." Almeida slowly stood up, his movements controlled. But there was a growing tension in the air. "You think you can just walk in here and threaten me? You think you'll get away with this?" His voice was low, dangerous. "This isn't a threat," Amanda replied, feeling her heart race. "It's a promise." For a moment, the silence between them was almost unbearable. Almeida walked around the desk, getting closer to her, his eyes locked on hers. "You know, Amanda, it could have been so easy. You could have just let it go, gone on with your life. But now you've put yourself in an impossible position." Amanda knew he was bluffing, trying to intimidate her. But she also knew that people like him were more dangerous when they felt cornered. "You can't stop me now," she said, trying to maintain control. "I've already sent copies of the evidence to people who can do something about it. Even if something happens to me, your network will fall." Almeida stared at her, the coldness in his eyes giving way to something darker. "You're betting your life on this, doctor, and who's to say you're not alone in this?" It was at that moment that Amanda knew she needed to force the confession. She could see that he was on the verge of exploding, that the pressure was building. "Do you think you can keep this up forever?" she challenged. "How many more lives are you going to destroy before everything comes to light? How can you live with yourself knowing that you're killing innocent people?" Fury finally appeared on Almeida's face. "You don't understand anything," he shouted, losing control. "I did what was necessary. Those organs saved lives. It was a necessary evil." Amanda couldn't believe what she was hearing, but at the same time she knew she had gotten what she needed. His words were being recorded, and now she had the final proof. The confession that would destroy everything. "You just sealed your fate, Dr. Almeida," she said firmly. "This ends today." But before she could leave, the door burst open. 2 security guards entered the room, their expressions unfriendly. "Doctor," Almeida said, his voice regaining a calm, dark tone. "I think it's time for you to go." Amanda felt panic rise but tried not to show it. She was about to be taken, and she knew that what happened next could be her last chance for justice. But then, the unexpected happened. Gabriel, with perfect timing, entered the room, accompanied by police officers who had been waiting for the right moment. "The game is up, Almeida," Gabriel said, raising his badge to the security guards, who immediately stepped back. "You're under arrest." Almeida's face went pale, and Amanda felt a wave of relief wash over her. Everything had culminated in that moment, and now, finally, those responsible would pay for their crimes. As Almeida was led away, Amanda allowed herself to take a deep breath. She had faced danger head-on and emerged victorious. But the price she paid was high. She knew that even with justice being served, the scars from this confrontation would remain with her forever. The days following the confrontation were a mix of chaos and silence for Amanda. The hospital, once a pillar of trust in the community, was now at the epicenter of a scandal that shocked the nation. The press camped outside the building, cameras flashing and microphones thrust at anyone passing by. Headlines screamed words like organ trafficking and medical corruption as authorities flooded the hallways Amanda knew so well, searching for every trace of the dark operation that had unfolded right under their noses. Those responsible, including Dr. Almeida, were arrested and charged with a long list of crimes. The evidence that Amanda and Gabriel had gathered was irrefutable. Falsified medical records, bank documents tracing illicit payments, and of course, the recording of Almeida's confession, which sealed the fate of him and his accomplices. Justice was finally being served, and the empire of corruption that the hospital had become began to crumble. However, for Amanda, the relief of seeing the guilty handcuffed in the hospital under investigation was mixed with a profound sense of exhaustion. She had fought so intensely, pushed the limits of what she could endure, and now that it was all coming to an end, she felt the weight of the accumulated trauma on her shoulders. In a rare moment of calm, Amanda found herself sitting on a bench in a park near the hospital. The place, usually bustling with the sounds of children playing and birds singing, felt muted that day. It was as if the whole world was holding its breath, waiting for the next chapter. She took a deep breath, feeling the fresh air fill her lungs, and for the first time in a long time she realized she was truly, genuinely alive. She thought of her patient, the man whose death had thrown her into this hellish journey. She remembered his face, the sense of helplessness she felt when he passed, and how that loss had consumed her. But now, knowing what she knew, she could finally let go of that guilt. He hadn't died because of her mistake. He had been murdered by a corrupt system, and now she had brought justice for him. Gabriel sat down beside her, saying nothing, just offering his presence as support. He was also worn out, but there was a glimmer of satisfaction in his eyes. Together, they had done something extraordinary, something neither of them could have accomplished alone. "We did it," he finally said, breaking the silence. Amanda nodded, looking toward the horizon. Yes, we did. But she knew that "we did it" didn't erase what had happened. The emotional scars were still there, and Amanda knew it would take time to heal them. However, there was a quiet peace in knowing that despite everything, she had done the right thing. She had faced the darkness, even when it seemed like it would swallow her whole, and now the light was beginning to break through. She stood up, feeling the sun warm her skin, and looked at Gabriel. "It's time to start over," she said with renewed determination. "And this time, we'll do it the right way." Gabriel smiled, and together they walked away from the park, ready for whatever came next. Amanda knew that the road ahead would still be difficult, but now, with the truth finally revealed and justice served, she had the chance to rebuild her life, and perhaps find a new purpose, away from the shadows of the past. Justice had been served, and with it, Amanda found something she thought she had lost forever: hope. The weight of the last few months had gradually lifted, like a storm finally calming, leaving a clear sky and a new day dawning on the horizon. Amanda knew that life would never be the same again. The scars she carried, both visible and invisible, were proof of that. But instead of looking at them with pain, she began to see them as emblems of her strength, reminders that despite everything she had survived. Amanda stepped away from the turmoil that followed the scandal, seeking a place where she could reconnect with herself. She found what she was looking for in a small coastal town, where the pace of life was dictated by the tides and the constant sound of the waves was a soothing music that calmed her spirit. It was there that she discovered the Hope Clinic, a small health center serving the local community, a place where the values that had always guided her career, care, compassion, and integrity, were still the foundation of everything. When Amanda first entered the clinic, she was welcomed by a warm team of professionals who, despite the simplicity of the place, were dedicated and deeply committed to their patients. The clinic was modest, far from the state-of-the-art equipment and cold policies of large hospitals, but that was exactly what Amanda needed. Here, there was no room for schemes or corruption, only genuine care for those who needed it most. The clinic's director, a veteran doctor named Dr. Carvalho, looked at Amanda's resume and then at her. "You have great experience," he said with a smile. "But what interests me is why you chose this place, after everything you've been through." Amanda smiled back, feeling for the first time in a long time that she was exactly where she was meant to be. "Because here I can do what I love," she replied, with a sincerity that echoed in the small office. "Here, I can truly help people, without the shadows that have followed me for so long. I just want a chance to start over, to make a difference again." Dr. Carvalho nodded as if he understood everything without needing more words. "Then welcome to the team, Dr. Amanda. I'm sure you will be a valuable addition." The following days were a balm for Amanda. Each patient she attended to, each small victory she achieved, reinforced the feeling that she was rebuilding not just her career, but her very soul. She found joy in the little things, in conversations with a worried mother, in the smile of a child she helped heal, in the simple gratitude of an elderly person who, without words, showed how much her care meant. Far from the dazzling lights of elite hospitals and the darkness of her past, Amanda rediscovered the true reason she had become a doctor. It wasn't for glory, prestige, or recognition. It was for the opportunity to touch lives in a tangible and meaningful way, one life at a time. At the end of one afternoon, as the sun set over the ocean, painting the sky with shades of orange and purple, Amanda left the clinic and sat on a wooden bench near the beach. The sound of the waves was a constant reminder that, like the sea, life has its ups and downs, but beauty often reveals itself after the toughest storms. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, feeling the salty breeze on her face. For the first time in a long time, Amanda allowed herself to completely relax, knowing that the worst was behind her. The future, which once seemed uncertain and frightening, now shone with promises of new beginnings, new stories, and new possibilities. Amanda was no longer the same person who started this journey. She was stronger, wiser, and above all, at peace with herself. And as the sun disappeared on the horizon, she knew she had finally found what she had been searching for, a place to call home and a new chance to be the doctor and the woman she had always wanted to be. What would you do in Dr. Amanda's place? Would you have investigated until the end, risking your life, or would you have looked for another job and lived your life without looking back? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon so you don't miss any stories like this.